With the United States administration threatening Canada's sovereignty, we can no longer afford self-imposed trade barriers that limit trade among provinces and really serve to weaken our economy. In this video, we'll examine how our electricity grid has evolved to become a fragmented network of operators and why unifying it is important to Canada's economic independence. For over a century, Canada has built a strong partnership with the United States, trading high-quality goods and services, fostering trust and integrating our economies. Sadly, those days are over, and it seems we must adapt. We need to dismantle trade barriers between our provinces, including those hindering the flow of electricity essential for powering sustainable transportation and so much more. Today, electricity moves more freely across international borders than between our own provinces, a challenge we must address in order to build a strong and resilient economy. Today, we are delighted to have with us Francis Bradley, CEO of Electricity Canada, who will take us through this important discussion. And on that note, Francis, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today on Canada Day.
Well, it's kind of fascinating. I didn't realize that there were really trade barriers or things that were interfering with the flow of electricity east and west. I didn't understand that till I began, researching it, and then found out about Electricity Canada and what your role there is. And I'm going to let you sort of introduce yourself when that time comes. I also want to mention, Francis, because we really didn't talk about it when we initially met. Just want to mention that Francis has a fabulous podcast series that you can tune into called the Flux Capacitor. I'm going to put that link in the description of the video. So Francis will get you a few eyes, hopefully on that front as well.
Just
So,
published episode 116 yesterday.
well, you're more prolific than we are. We've been at it 4 years. We do one a month, and 4.5 years. So, but we'll catch up to you. I'll catch up to
Yeah.
you, I promise. So listen, Francis, I'm going to get out of the way and let you have at it.
I really am delighted to be able to join folks here on Canada Day. And yes, Tim mentioned I'm President and CEO of Electricity Canada. And so for those of you that don't know about Electricity Canada, let me just say a brief few words. So our mission is to be the trusted voice of Canadian electricity. A challenge a little bit for me today. I've got a summer cold, so I'm struggling a little bit with the voice. But as an association, our purpose is to represent and advocate for the principal companies that are in the direct value chain of electricity. So that basically means that if you turn on a light switch somewhere in Canada, everything it took to generate, to transmit, and to distribute the electricity to turn on that light was probably done by one of our 42 members that are in every province and every territory. So that's who we are at Electricity Canada. The topic that I've been asked to talk about today is what? No power grid for Canada? So that's easy to explain, right? Let me explain it. But there's a lot of things that you need to take on board first. So I'm going to give you some context about the challenges the electricity system in Canada is facing right now. And then we'll dive into talking about the National Grid for Canada. And I'm looking forward to getting into a conversation as well at the end with the questions that you may have. So to begin with, a lot of the information that I'm going to talk about, at least at the front end, comes from Electricity Canada's State of the Electricity Industry report, which we produce annually. And the most recent edition we came out with just back in August. So, you see the screen, that is the cover of the report. The goal of our State of the Industry report is to create kind of a snapshot of the issues that the sector is facing right now. And so that snapshot was in March of this year. And this slide has a QR code if you want to read a copy of the report. Now, I want to begin by looking at the starting point for every electricity company in Canada, big or small, market run, crown corporation. It's something like this room. And this is a photograph I took last July on a visit to Yellowknife. This is a control room at Northwest Territory Power Corporation. Now, Most control rooms for other utilities, they'd be a little bit bigger than this, though I'm sure people are probably still watching baseball, but they're often doing exactly the same thing. If you look at the top left of this photo, you'll understand my point. You see that readout where it says frequency? It's 60.02 hertz. That's the frequency of alternating current. Every control room has a readout for that. That is the starting point when it comes to electricity delivery in every province and in every territory. A reliable supply of electricity to customers expressed as 60 hertz, overseen by thousands of dedicated workers. And it's a range of 0.5%. It can go either way, and that's it. Every province, they have their own wrinkles when it comes to generating and transmitting electricity. This photograph from Yellowknife, you can see there's a gauge for a diesel infeed in the top right. Now that's very important in the north, in some jurisdictions. It's different elsewhere. Places are fueled by hydro, fueled by natural gas, fueled by nuclear, and in some provinces, even by coal. But at the end of the day, every supplier of electricity must transmit 60 hertz of power to the customer. That's the starting point when it comes to the delivery of electricity in every province and territory. Now, if we start looking at what the future is going to be bringing, this chart gives you a sense of what really keeps CEOs awake at night. And this is how are we going to meet that growing demand for electricity? We're going to need to be able to meet a demand that will double in the next 25 years. Electricity Canada's members, they've got to thoughtfully and strategically grow the sector. This is by an astronomical amount. It took us more than 100 years to build the system that we've got today. And we're talking about in 25 years or less, being able to meet demand that's twice that. So it's going to require an unprecedented, and to Tim's point in the introduction, this is all about team and a team effort. Now, this can be done, but we've got to make sure that this massive build out can happen. And we do have a lot of challenges. And let me touch on a couple of those challenges. One of the biggest challenges lies here. Well, not at Niagara Falls specifically, but what Niagara Falls symbolizes. The Canada US electricity trade, as Tim mentioned, it's more than a century old. It is one of the most important ties between the two nations. Over the past 5 years, the US has imported 331 terawatt hours of electricity from Canada, which in turn benefits the Canadian economy. And all of this got threatened at the start of this February when the US threatened massive tariffs on Canada. Both Canada and the US have spent the last several months now negotiating, and apparently we're supposed to be restarting talks soon or not. It's hard to tell what the status is of these conversations between our government and the government in the United States. But one aspect of these trade wars, announced trade wars, real or imagined, that hasn't been talked about is what the current situation with our largest trading partner would mean to Niagara Falls, for example, and the trade of electricity between Canada and the United States. Because the integrated grid, it provides resilience and it provides reliability on both sides of the border, as well as supporting affordability and growth. And we don't know what tariffs will do when it comes to any of those things. Indeed, there's no existing mechanism for the application of tariffs to electricity exports. So let's stick a pin in that. But I mention it because if you want to talk about a national grid, the situation with the US is important to understand. Now, let's move on to another existential threat. This one is the threat that electricity providers face is what happens when it tries to build major infrastructure projects. When it comes to building major electricity projects, the people who build and invest need one thing above all, and that's certainty. There's a great deal at stake. The financial cost of getting this wrong is too great. A decision made today needs to hold up, depending upon the asset, 20 years, 30 years, or maybe even 40 years later. And so, what you see on the screen here, this is the wheel of decisions that anyone investing in building large scale electricity projects, they need to be able to answer. Do we have financing? Will it provide the greatest benefit at the lowest cost? Can it be built within a predictable and reasonable time frame? Do we have the labor? Do we have the supply chains? All of these questions need to be answered before a single cable is laid down and strung up. The problem is, it's hard to get certainty on any of these conditions are going to be met. This chart shows that Canada ranks second worst among the 38 countries in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, when it comes to the pace of permitting. In fact, Canada charts right between Slovenia and the Slovak Republic. Federal permitting and approvals, they're slow, they're cumbersome, and they're duplicative as they involve processes from multiple agencies, multiple departments, often conflicting with existing processes that are at the provincial level. And so, complicating matters, federal efforts to stimulate building often falter because electricity is a provincial responsibility. And these are managed by disparate local and regional systems of regulation. So, what ends up happening is one level of government sets a policy direction, another level of government reacts, and regulators often, try and interpret what can and can't be done. So, it's difficult to get projects moving forward as a result. And slow processes are killing projects and they're driving up cost of the projects that are getting built. Now, the federal government has signified a significant shift in attitude towards this. Bill C5, which recently passed in the House and the Senate, could prove to be an important step in building things faster by focusing on how to move a project of national interest forward, not whether it should move forward at all. This act has the potential to provide greater certainty for investors. One big aspect is to adopt a one project, one review process, which will streamline major projects significantly if adopted. And when we get to the Q&A and the conversation, I'd be happy to talk about this further. I appeared before the House Committee studying Bill C5 before its adoption, so I am familiar and I have views on C5. But let's move to another big concern for the electricity sector. Now, this is a photo of the wildfires that broke out earlier this year when unseasonal Santa Ana wind gusts blew in from the desert, bringing with them uncontrollable embers to Los Angeles and to the surrounding areas. In 48 hours, 17,000 acres were burnt down. And this is not something specific to the US. Every electricity company in Canada already has or will be dealing with wildfires at some point this summer. We've seen very significant evacuations that have taken place already in a number of regions of the country. And so, just as many of them have had to deal with severe ice storms in February and March, they're now dealing with wildfires. So, extreme weather, that's the new normal. The good news is there are 8,760 hours in a year, and the average customer in Canada is only going to experience about 10 hours of power outages spread over two or three outages through two or three times during the year. In 2023, the latest available year for analysis, this meant an interruption averaging 10.08 hours per customer for the entire year. That means despite severe weather, despite enormous load growth, despite the demands of electrification, electricity in Canada is still over 99.9% reliable. But any expansion of the electricity grid needs to be able to withstand extreme weather, and planning for it needs to be informed by smart risk management practices. Okay, now I know we're supposed to be, we're here to talk about a national grid for Canada. And so let's jump into that now. So in the electricity sector, we talk a lot about interties. And interties are when utilities build interconnections that allow the passage of current to be shared between two or more systems. Interties are what enables interprovincial transmission, which is going to be important for how we build any future grid because it'll require more electricity generation, transmission, and distribution to ensure reliability. But the advantage of interties are you share electricity load between neighboring provinces. Load sharing during peak demand, in particular, results in more efficient use of resources. You can enhance grid stability and reliability, and it gives you the ability to connect renewable power to regions that are more reliant on fossil fuels. Now, right now, we have a limited range of options for interprovincial connections, and here's some examples. In some areas, there's no connection. Yukon is an example. And some of the other territories are examples of that. They are completely reliant on their own power which in some territories means the use of expensive diesel to generate electricity. Consequently, electricity can be quite expensive north of 60. There's some one-way connections, like Prince Edward Island, who gets most of its power through an undersea cables from power that's generated in New Brunswick. And then there's two-way interconnections, such as the one Ontario and Quebec share. They have an agreement to share 2,775 megawatts of combined capacity. Generally speaking, Ontario shares the capacity with Quebec during the winter when it gets really cold, and Quebec shares its capacity with Ontario in the summer when it experiences a heat wave like this past week. But some of those peaks are changing in terms of when they take place. Now we're starting to see more of these two-way connections happening. There's the Bertle transmission project, recently completed, 230 kilovolt line connecting Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And that's serving to support Saskatchewan's goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by providing access to Manitoba hydro resources. Then there's also the Nova Scotia New Brunswick reliability tie. It's going to span 96 kilometers between Onslow, Nova Scotia, and the New Brunswick border and offer enhanced reliability to both provinces. Construction on this intertie is going to be completed by 2027, and it's going to be critical to helping Nova Scotia meet its target to be off coal by 2030. All right. In fact, it's pretty straightforward, honestly, the process to build interprovincial transmission. All you need to do is first a needs assessment, where the provinces determine that there is a need to address factors including using renewables, load growth, or grid reliability. You need to do route selection. You need to identify a feasible route for the transmission line, which includes environmental assessments, land use, and social license. You need feasibility studies and impact assessment once a route has been selected. The technical, economic, and environmental impact of the study needs to be considered. Then you've got material procurement with long lead times caused by geopolitical and climate related risks. Materials are going to need to be produced as soon as possible and secured. You've got construction. Once contracts are awarded and sites are prepared, the towers and lines can be assembled, involving a highly skilled workforce. And then you've got testing, commissioning. Following an appropriate testing period, the corridors can be energized and connected. So there you go. Fairly straightforward. These are the steps. Straightforward, but not easy. Because all of those things involve all kinds of complex matters, ranging from getting permission to build, to working through engagement with Indigenous peoples, to working around supply chain issues, to navigating the necessary approvals. And there's a lot of obstacles to all of this, which finally brings us to the topic at hand for tonight. Why can't we build a national grid? The problem is, I think most people think electricity kind of runs like this, east to west, like some electrical version of the CPR railway in the 1880s. The truth is, it is much more complex. Here's how our electricity grid actually appears. The major lines run north-south, not east-west, as part of a continental grid that covers North America. And this has been a system that has evolved over generations as a result of economic opportunities. An east-west corridor, like the rail line, has never existed. It was never, felt to be necessary, or it wasn't, convenient to think about doing it any other way, given that, electricity was really until recently being called into question. And so the conversation now has changed because of our trade relationship. But the other big thing, very big thing, in fact, about the real world version of our electricity grid is not an actual natural feature, but one imposed on us. And that is provincial borders. Those borders are just not arbitrary lines drawn on a map. Each province has a very different way of legislating and regulating electricity. You might think, why hasn't BC or Saskatchewan built interties with Alberta? All three provinces could benefit from such a relationship. Well, BC Hydro and Sask Power are crown entities. The Alberta electricity system is market driven, and the way they operate are vastly different. So, here's the key to understanding why there isn't a national grid yet. We don't have one electricity system in Canada. We have 13. Constitutionally speaking, legislative oversight over electricity is within the authority of the provinces, not the federal government. Ultimately, the barrier to greater interregional and interprovincial coordination with respect to the electricity system has to do with provincial jurisdictions. Over the past several years, some provinces have pushed back at federal attempts at regulation and commitments to net zero targets, for example, simply opting out or putting moratoriums on building projects. Now, that's not a criticism of those provinces. It's just a statement that they are the bodies that have the actual authority when it comes to regulating the electricity sector. And as I just indicated, each province and territory has a different approach in how they regulate electricity to be generated, transmitted, distributed, and paid for with different types of ownership. Crown corporations, large municipals, privately run. In some provinces, it's a hybrid of all of those models. Now, on top of that, there's even more disparate local and regional systems of regulation. So, consequently, as I said earlier, we've got one level of government potentially giving direction, another level of government reacting, and multiple regulators offering their own interpretation of what can and can't be done. And so, nothing moves forward as a result. Now, I'm reminded of the wisdom of the character of Dante in Kevin Smith's movie Clerks. I don't know if folks have seen that film, but Dante said, this would be the perfect job if it weren't for the customers. From a power planning standpoint, it's the same thing. It would be a lot easier to coordinate building a grid across the country were it not for governments. But the times they are changing. I mentioned Bill C5 earlier and the federal government's ambition for Canada to build projects of national interest. We're also witnessing provinces keen to build greater interconnections east-west in Canada rather than north-south with the United States. This may be a moment, and this might be the moment we need to be able to break that logjam. So, what are the recommendations for work in this area? Let me just give you a quick rundown of some of the things that we're suggesting that would help in this area. So first off, we need regulatory reform that gets extreme weather because that's so critical, regardless of whether your grids run north, south, east, west, or all of the above. So investments in grid modernization, they need to be supported by proactive grid hardening so that the system can stand up to extreme weather. We need to advocate strongly against tariffs being applied by the United States. New tariffs on the electricity sector will be devastating to Canadian and American consumers, and we don't even know what it might do to reliability. We've got to invest in, pardon me, we have to invest as well in the distribution system. The provincial regulatory structures that govern distribution infrastructure, they've not kept up with the times. The federal government should be setting minimum standards to support the build out that's going to be required. We have to have alignment of permitting and approval processes with desired outcomes. If the goal is to build and to build faster, a holistic approach to building needs to be adopted. If there's one project, there should be only one approval process. We need a one-stop approach to approving large-scale builds instead of approvals from multiple agencies across federal and provincial governments with different requirements. We need to shore up our supply chain. We need strong supply chains to safeguard the safety and long-term stability of our electricity system against attacks and against weather events. And we need to develop a planning process for interprovincial transmission. Interprovincial transmission is going to be key to ensuring affordable, reliable electricity into the future. And to do that, we need a process that engages the provinces, the federal government, and Indigenous peoples to work together. And one thing I haven't talked about yet, but is top of mind in the sector and will have a massive impact on future demand. That's the rise of AI, of data centers, of hyperscalers. We need to provide regulation for building data centers. Canada's energy regulation system was designed for an era of landlines and telegraphs. We need to look at how we're going to be able to adapt this and be able to meet this changed future that we're heading into. All of these things are going to be needed if we want to meet future demand and expand east-west corridors. So, if there's one thing I want you to come away with from this talk, it's this: we have much to do, and we need to get it right. Canada's electricity providers they're willing and they're able to build greater interconnections between provinces so we can make it more reliable and more affordable. But we need to address the obstacles we face as a sector and get the solutions that can get us building and keep investments flowing into Canada. Everything is changing in this world, but electricity is always there no matter what. And Canada's electricity providers are there to make sure that nothing stops people from getting power for everything that matters to them. So, today being Canada Day, I want to close this part with a quote from an important Canadian. Sir Adam Beck is one of the people responsible for bringing electricity to Canadians. He helped create the Hydroelectric Power Commission of Ontario, Ontario Hydro, which was the precursor for Hydro One, the IESO, and Ontario Power Generation. He once said, "Nothing is too big for us. Nothing is too expensive to imagine. Nothing is too visionary." I think that's what I'd like more Canadians to think about when it comes to the possibility of building our electricity future. Yes, there are challenges, but we can face these challenges just as Canadians have faced other challenges. Electricity is central to Canada's economic success. Available, affordable power was the key to building a prosperous country for our parents and our grandparents, thanks to people like Sir Adam Beck. The electricity infrastructure that we build today will do the same for our children and our grandchildren. We just need to start saying nothing is too big for us. And with that, happy to engage in a conversation with any questions folks may have.
All right. Thank you, Francis. There aren't too many questions lined up, Jason, but I'll let you keep an eye on those. And again, I'll invite anybody who has a question or a comment that they'd like to make. This is your opportunity to do so. I don't think, Francis, you made it look all that easy to set up interconnects between provinces. It looks like there might be a little bit to it.
Well, if it was easy, we would already have done it. Right? No, it is absolutely challenging. It's like a lot of other issues in the Canadian Federation when there are if you issues that are broader than the interests of a single province, but that fall specifically within the constitutional responsibility of the provinces. I mean, how do you how do you get around that? Federal government has an absolutely critical role to play. They've got a limited number of levers, but they do have levers, and we want to see them use those levers, right? And those levers are the convening authority. They've got the what's referred to sometimes as the bully pulpit,
Mhm.
and then they've got a spending authority. And I think we're starting to see this federal government step forward. What will be critical, though, I mentioned Bill C5. What we don't yet have is what's the subset of issues or projects rather that Bill C5 is going to address first, and they've indicated that it will be a small number of projects. How many of those are going to be interprovincial transmission? We don't know at this stage.
Right, right. One of the things that occurred to me as you were sort of explaining the background and the status of things is that the role that renewables play in this whole discussion. Part of what we're trying to accomplish, I think, by talking about a national uh, grid, or at least one that's far more connected east-west, is the stability of the whole grid.
Yeah,
We've seen many times over the years disruptions to the electricity grid caused by one piece of it going down and creating a hiccup effect and rolling blackouts and so on. And one of the advantages to renewables, of course, is stability. When you have, far tighter network of connections and things like battery storage in the back to keep things stable and running. It all works together, doesn't it? And renewables slide into this whole discussion quite nicely, I think.
yeah. I mean, the future is definitely going to be an all of the above future, right? And that will give us the greatest likelihood of a reliable system. We don't put all our eggs in one basket, and we make sure that we're looking at all of the technologies that are available to us from a generation standpoint, but also transmission. And that's the topic today. Is absolutely going to be a critical component of that because the ability to the greater interconnection you have, the greater reliability that you have.
Yeah.
quite simply. And you're right. We have seen events that have impacted significant parts of the grid, but they don't happen very often. And the more interconnection we have, the less frequently that those things occur, because you've got a larger pool to be able to pull upon when something occurs.
Right, right. And this may be totally unrelated, but I'm just curious to ask the question whether all the discussion around pipelines and the movement of oil east and west is, I mean, it's energy, right? It's a supply of energy, just a different form. I guess did those two sectors cross paths in any way?
Not really. The objectives are different. Um, because we don't export electricity except to the United States, where we've got transmission lines interconnecting. We're not looking for access to tidewater to sell kilowatt hours to Asian markets. Not yet. One day in the future there might be an international major economy on hydrogen, but we're not there. And so yeah, our focus is certainly more within the North American context, within the Canadian context. But yeah, are there opportunities potentially for sharing corridors? I think there are. And that's something that a number of advocates are now talking about. I was at a couple of conferences this spring where indigenous groups are looking at and advocating for a corridor approach to development. Highways, access to ports, electricity transmission, and pipelines, all within the same general corridor. So, I mean, that might be part of what the future may look like.
Sure. Well, thanks for that. All right. So Jason is the fellow that asks the questions, and I know his internet's been going in and out today. It looks
Oh,
like it just went out. So we have a backup. James, are you with us there? You can turn on your camera. There we go.
I'm here.
So
Yes, sir.
first off, I'm glad you changed. Just a little inside humor there, but thanks a lot. And I know Jason's trying to climb back on, but maybe in the meantime, could you take a peek at the questions
And
and see?
I'm back.
Oh, okay, you're off the hook, James. But
All
thanks.
right. Well, one question that I do remember, Francis, was a question about using high voltage DC buried cables as a protection against wildfire damage.
yeah, that's a good question.
I can spot a couple there, and I think well, know the answer to this one. Is Nova Scotia the only province that's still using coal?
No, it's not. The government of Canada's goal was to eliminate coal by 2030. We've seen Alberta, in fact, eliminate coal ahead of that last year. Alberta got off coal, but we still see coal in Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan is definitely challenged with what that future is going to look like. But yeah, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick are heading towards a 2030 future.
I can do another one here. Wind turbines and solar PV are now the cheapest forms of electricity generation. How do you think an east-west grid will support their deployment in Canada? You kind of answered that, but
Yeah, no, but that is a really good question. And yes, in terms of the incremental cost of adding generation, these new renewables are certainly much less expensive. The challenge, of course, if you take wind, for example, is that it only blows, if you're lucky, 30 to 40% of the time. And so, like, how do you back that? Are you looking at grid scale batteries in the future? The simplest way is actually just to interconnect into a larger grid. Um, I vacation in the summer in the Gaspésie region of Quebec. Quebec has huge, massive hydro resources, but it's also building a lot of wind, because the hydro and the wind match up very, very well. So more transmission interconnections is going to unlock more opportunities for things like for additional wind and additional solar. because then where's your backup, and where essentially, how do you follow that if if the wind doesn't blow? Well, you're interconnected to a grid, and the grid provides that. So yeah, more transmission is going to unlock more renewables.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have a
Jason,
quick question for Francis. I don't think you touched on this during your talk, but do you have an opinion on the homegrown manufacturing kind of supply chain for all of this equipment, transformers, and just all of the equipment we would need to build and maintain this sort of thing?
Yeah, yeah, and there is a significant push on now for, can we nearshore more of this equipment, and to what degree can we? We've got some manufacturers in Canada, and we're hoping we're going to see more of an expansion, but a lot of the work that's taking place now with the development of small modular reactors is a really good example of trying to build a supply chain domestically here in Canada. When we built out the sort of the first wave of nuclear in Canada in the 60s and in the 70s, we were using homegrown technology. The CANDU reactors had a massive supply chain right across the country, and continues to be important, as a number of those plants have been refurbished. So as we're looking for and looking to small modular reactors, the first one's going to come online in Ontario in 2029. We're hoping that we're going to see a significant build out of a domestic supply chain for small modular reactors as well. But yeah, every piece of equipment, the degree to which you can look at nearshoring, is something that folks are interested in. But there's just like some things that we just don't build in this country, and some things that we just don't build in North America. But it is certainly something that folks are interested. But like you mentioned transformers, but I mean everything from transformers to turbines to bucket trucks, to meters. We have meters that are assembled, some of them in Canada, some in the United States, but all of the guts that go into those meters are from all around the world. But yeah, as we're looking at new approaches to this, new technologies, small modular reactors is an excellent example. There's a real interest in trying to see if we can develop domestic supply chains for that.
Yeah. And would give us a valuable export
Yeah,
item as
absolutely.
well.
Well, and that's that we don't. I guess it's a Canadian thing. We don't we don't kind of pound on our chest and brag too much. But the other side of the can-do technology is, not only does it power New Brunswick, and it provides most of the power in Ontario right now. It's also a technology that we exported internationally, and we're likely going to be able to do the same thing with these small modular reactors if we if we're successful in developing them and moving them out. I'm very positive on wind and solar and more hydro and small modular reactors. I think all of these technologies are going to be terrific, but SMRs in particular, I think are going to give us an opportunity to build a domestic industry and a domestic supply chain that we then would be able to export.
Great, thank you. Tim, do you have another one you want to pick up?
oh, there are a bunch of juicy questions here. Some of them kicking the hornet's nest, I think. Maybe I'll ask them anyway, and you can duck if you like, Francis.
Pick away.
Why does your early load growth chart show growth from hydrogen?
From hydrogen.
I didn't catch it, but I think that it's leading to a discussion that often occurs among EV fans, that hydrogen is kind of a lost cause for
Oh,
transport.
I see. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that actually, yeah, that is a good question, because it isn't about hydrogen for transportation purposes. It's about hydrogen essentially in some cases for future generation. Um, because yeah, it isn't about
Transport.
transportation.
All right.
Right. It is about, on the one hand, part of it is generation, and other uses of hydrogen, but it also is something that we potentially might have a terrific advantage internationally if the technology ever comes around so that we can produce clean hydrogen. I mean, we've had very significant expressions of interest, for example, from Germany, and they've signed agreements for the development of future hydrogen, and that's not for transportation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And of
That's
course,
for
we know, and a lot of us sort of spend time studying this and understand that hydrogen comes with a suite of really difficult problems to overcome, not the least of which is the cost.
yep,
If you have a source of hydrogen out of the ground and can use it at that location, it seems to, at that point, maybe make sense. But once you have to
sure.
prepare it and then transport it and then do what you need to do, it becomes pretty expensive.
Mind you, a generation or two ago, we would have said the same thing about wind power. We would have
Yeah.
said the same thing about solar. And
Yeah.
now, as one of the earlier questions noted, it's the many jurisdictions. That's the lowest cost next increment of power is something that a generation or two ago we said, no, it's so expensive, it's never going to happen.
It,
So there might be a technological breakthrough with respect to hydrogen.
It would
But yeah,
have
but
to
it's not.
have to be, I think, a breakthrough in the law of physics, but we'll leave that aside.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a challenge.
and it may be, yeah, but coming back to the question, it isn't about fuel cells and transportation. It's about frankly our ability to figure out how we can actually export electricity in some cases, but also here domestically use it for power generation. For some of our members, they're looking at the potential for using hydrogen potentially for power generation out beyond 2040. It's not a
Mm,
tomorrow thing,
okay.
but it might be in the next generation or two generations from now in terms of technology.
Hey, all right. Um, Here's one which is kind of an interesting question to me anyway. How does the federal and provincial investment in the national electrical grid compare in scale to government support for fossil fuels for oil pipelines and the like?
Wow, that's a really good question. And I don't know the answer to that. But I do know nobody in the federal government has done the equivalent of this kind of investment that was put into, Trans Mountain, for example. So, there has been significant incentives proposed by the federal government. I certainly will grant them that. They didn't get them all through in the last parliament. And so there, investment tax credits. We've seen a number of them that have been brought forward. But one of the things that I keep reminding the federal government is that they ran out of runway in December before the election, and they did not pass the clean electricity investment tax credit. We'd like to see them move forward with that one. But I wouldn't be able to give you a compare and contrast of electricity versus fossil fuels. Um, Frankly, I'm just focused on what's happening in this sector.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. But this is an eclectic list of questions, but
That's the way I like it.
this is how they're rolling. Well, you talked about Bill C5. Will it make the environment assessments weaker? Does it put the environment somewhat at risk?
Yeah, so I don't think so. But again, it's just my opinion. And I've discussed this with people at the Impact Assessment Agency, for example. When the legislation was initially introduced, chatting with folks over there, trying to get a sense of how they saw this. And as I kind of noted in my talk, their view is that this doesn't circumvent any environmental requirements at all. All it does is it determines it goes kind of around the determination of need for a project. But like all of the federal, and that's another thing here, all of the federal legislation with respect to environmental protection, species at risk, the Fisheries Act, Migratory Bird Convention Act, all of that still comes into play. All that Bill C5 gives us is it gets us past the conversation about should we even do this project. It's yes, this project is going to go forward. Okay, now what are the environmental protections that are going to be required? What do we have to do to satisfy the Fisheries Act? So all of those pieces of legislation are going to have to be satisfied. but it kind of jump starts the front end of it. Now it only does that for whatever that small subset of projects are, and that's one of my concerns. It doesn't address, I think, what are some fundamental challenges that we need to address. And some of them that I've talked about in the past are clean electricity regulations, which in our view need some further adjustments so that it doesn't have a negative impact on reliability in some jurisdictions. The Fisheries Act, for example, we think there needs to be some fine tuning in a number of pieces of legislation. So I think C5 sends the signal that they need to send about whatever this small subset of big major projects are and that they want to see moving forward. But we can't lose sight of there are still some fundamental things that still need to be fixed in terms of making sure that if your project isn't on that short list of whatever it's going to be, 10 projects or 12 projects, all of the other rules still apply. And how are you going to be able to bring a project forward? Because but who knows what's going to be on that list? And it certainly won't be everything that's on the wish list of my members. And they're still going to want to get those other projects moving forward to be able to meet the needs of customers and in the decade ahead.
Yeah. All right. Well, and here's a question that actually flows well into our next month's webinar, which I'll talk about. And it's about the question from Rob is how can technology change be accommodated in the longer term projects? For example, we know renewables are coming down in cost. Local residential solar is really, really growing. And we have on the horizon things like V2G, so vehicle to grid technologies. Imagine tens of thousands of electric vehicles parked as they always are 95% of the time and plugged in. How do you plan for that?
Yeah, and that's a great question. How do you plan for that? And that's something that I'm very much spend a lot of time thinking about. We, I think, as a sector, are doing a pretty good job trying to plan for those challenges and trying to plan for, well, not really the challenges. And in a lot of cases, when we're talking about new technology, we're talking about opportunities here. Um, um, uh, but yeah, how do we have it right? I guess that's the key question. Are the people that are doing the modeling, do they really understand and have they nailed what the actual impacts are of these new technologies? Frankly, I've spent an awful lot of time over the last couple of years with people who do energy modeling, and I've had very positive experiences with some of those folks, and I've had not so positive experiences, some of them, when talking, for example, to people in the federal government who were working on the clean electricity regulations. Some of their modeling didn't take into consideration things like, reliability. So it was an economic model, not a reliability model. But yeah, I mean, have we figured out exactly what all of these technologies are going to be able to bring to the table? I don't think so, because I think we're still trying to get our heads around. I mean, me personally, you mentioned vehicle to grid. I'm just a huge fan of that whole concept. My car, like everybody else probably on this webinar, my car sits in the driveway. 95% of the time it's plugged in, fully charged, and it's sitting there doing nothing. And so that's one of the reasons why when I talk about the future in 2020, 2050, I always talk about we're going to have to meet a doubling of demand. Some of my colleagues say, "Oh, we're going to have to build a grid that's 2 times bigger." No, we're not going to build a grid that's 2 times bigger, because we're going to be able to take advantage of things like vehicle to grid. Do a simple calculation on the back of the envelope. I got an 82 kilowatt battery that just happens to be connected to 4 wheels that's not being used. How many of those do we need to be able to replicate the entire electricity system from a total capacity standpoint? Well, it's about 1.85 million cars,
Hmm.
something like that. You know,
Yeah.
and we're going to be there real soon. And if
Yeah.
we figure out how we can tap into just that which is actually not going to be that difficult, I think, from a technology standpoint. We're not talking about hydrogen here, we're talking about, how do we actually take advantage of this unused capacity that's sitting out there. There's a wonderful, I think, wonderful example of how that's going to be transformative in a way that will, I think, massively improve the reliability of the system
Yeah.
and reduce the overall cost of the system to the consumer. Because there's a lot of concerns about affordability, justifiably so, because there's a lot of investments that are going to have to be made heading to the future. But on the sort of the other side of that is some of these new technologies are going to have, I think, a pretty significant downward pressure on price, upward pressure on reliability. It's a win-win all around.
Yeah, I envision the day when I can sell electricity back to the utility during peak times and give them up to some percentage out of my car battery. And
Yep.
if, thousands of other people are doing the same thing, you can actually, sell it when it's expensive and then soak it up at night when it's inexpensive, and it stabilizes the grid and you get recoup some of the costs of your EV back.
Yep.
It's, as you say, it's a win-win for everybody if we could make that happen.
Yeah, and to that point, Tim, I envisage a time not when I'm not even going to be making those decisions myself. I will be using an AI, and I'll probably have a choice, much like I have a choice now when I'm driving somewhere and I'm using the GPS. Do I want the fastest route or do I want the most efficient? And I think, we're going to be making the same decision 10 years from now in terms of making use of our EV plugged out. Do we want to maximize the dollars back to us, or do we want to maximize the environmental benefits to the grid? And we'll just tell whatever the AI that's going to manage that. Yeah, today I'm feeling good about the grid. I want green choices made in terms of when you release the kilowatts in my battery, as opposed to I want you to maximize the value.
Yeah, and there may be a situation where you're going away on vacation and one of your EVs is going to be sitting there unused for 2 weeks. Well,
Yep,
you could cycle that, substantially.
absolutely,
Yeah,
man.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Well, listen, I think that we've probably burned through our time. I would like to thank you very much for coming, especially it being a holiday, and especially you feeling a little under the weather, Francis. It was really good of you to come and have this chat. And you've segued into a great opportunity for me to introduce next month's webinar. So with that, I will thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Jason, sorry that you've had your problems. I think we've maybe even have lost you again. James, thanks for being there in the background and ready to jump in. Really good of you to do that. Yeah, so next month's webinar, I've alluded to it. It's scheduled for August 5th, same time, 7:30 Eastern Time. And I tell you what, it's one you will not want to miss. We are going to be welcoming back Jeff Don, so professor emeritus from Dalhousie University and one of the leading researchers in North America in terms of battery research. Jeff's talk is entitled Vehicle to Grid and Second Use Are Coming. Here's Why. And if there's anyone who can speak to that topic, it's going to be Jeff. He's just such a well-informed and fabulous speaker. It's something I'm certainly going to be looking forward to, and I hope you will look forward to it as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. It's quick, it's free, and it helps more people discover our channel on YouTube. That's all for this month's Canada Talks Electric Cars. Thanks for coming on Canada Day. We didn't get huge numbers out for this one, but we do appreciate those of you who made the time to come and share that hour with us. From everyone at Electric Vehicle Society, stay charged, stay curious. We'll see you next time.